If you've been paying attention to the NBA at all recently, you've probably heard that LeBron James is suffering from something called peroneal tendinopathy. Now, what exactly is peroneal tendinopathy? Does it have any implications for him in terms of load management or his ability to go for the playoffs? And really any implications for his career moving forward beyond this year? Let's get into it. So the first question I guess we gotta ask is, what exactly is peroneal tendinopathy? And to answer that, we gotta ask, what is tendinopathy in general? So tendinopathy can be broken down into basically 3.5 main components, one being tendinitis, the next one being tendinosis, the third being peritendinitis. Now tendinitis is an actual inflammation of the tendon itself, right? The tendon itself is inflamed, it's hot, it's cooking. Tendinosis is actually when the tendon becomes scarred, thickened, doesn't really want to glide and work properly, right? Almost like it's just stuck in place. Peritendinitis is actually an inflammation of the wrap around the tendon. Remember, most tendons have this cellophane wrap around them with some goo in there that allows the tendon to just, kind of glide back and forth very easily. That's what gives you real fluid motion. When that wrap and that fluid around the tendon start to get inflamed, that's probably when you're starting to feel the most pain, right? That's the most acute pain usually you're feeling with a tendon sort of derangement. Tendinitis, yes, hurts, but peritendinitis is one of those really like searing type pains. Now tendinopathy can mean any one of these three things. And then also, I guess, kind of partial tendon tears, right? Or those longitudinal tears that go through the tendon. That usually can start to cause tendinitis or tendinosis, right? Or even peritendinitis. So partial tearing of the tendon can lead to any of these other derangements as well. So kind of 3.5 things there. And really no matter what LeBron James has, tendinitis, tendinosis, peritendinitis, partial tears, whatever, it all falls under that umbrella of tendinopathy. And honestly, they're all treated relatively the same. There is some nuance there, but all those things are happening to a muscle group of his called the peroneals. Now, what exactly are the peroneals? So the peroneal muscle group actually starts pretty high up in the leg. It has a pretty big lever arm. It crosses the outside of your ankle, and one of them actually dives down into your foot, while the other, there's actually two of these muscles here. One, and we'll just say this one is 2 because it's underneath of it. This one actually comes right here to the lateral part of your foot. Now, this is a pretty crude drawing because I'm using my kids' washable markers, so my wife doesn't kill me after this. But as you can see, these have the function of number 1, plantar flexing your foot. The other one is everting, which means the foot goes out. So you see how the foot is going out like that? That is the eversion of the foot. Now, the interesting thing is pushing down as well as the eversion like this also combines those two things into one big overarching function, which is stabilizing the foot. And that's why the peroneals always get in the line of fire when it comes to ankle issues, tendinitis, because they are usually the ones that are trying to stabilize your foot when you're doing weird stuff like playing basketball. But the stabilization component of these muscles is really specific to LeBron and his issues with tendinopathy in the peroneals, because like I said, that one peroneal does come here to the bottom of the foot. As you can see, it kind of wraps right through the foot, then kind of attaches right in the middle. Now it attaches to the same bone, the base of the bone, that can create a bunion. Now LeBron James does have bunions. When you have bunions, usually you have a little bit of instability in this joint right here. And so if this joint is unstable, this tendon is trying to stabilize this while it is trying to plantar flex the foot. You're going to be at a little bit more risk of any sort of tendinopathy with that. Now, a lot of people don't use their feet enough to make it so that they end up getting this type of tendinopathy, but someone like LeBron James, who is jumping over and over and over and over and over again, he's gonna be way more susceptible to this type of tendon derangement. Now, of course, orthotics and compression socks and things like that are gonna help, but at a certain point, somebody with his frame coming up and down so many times over a career as long as his, you're gonna start to get issues. All right, so now we know what tendinopathy is, we know what the peroneals are and what they do. What does LeBron James do about it now? Number one, obviously you got to get an accurate diagnosis, and MRI is usually first line for this. The next thing is, for any sort of itis, first thing is just rest, right? It's calming the tendon down and it's stopping the activity that caused it in the first place. Now, in his case, that's gonna be pretty tough, right? So, the first thing is making sure the foot is, aligned in the shoe properly, and you're putting consistent, even load from your foot into the ground. It usually takes the form of an orthotic or a brace or a combination. There is such a thing called a Ritchie brace, which is very good for peroneal tendinopathy. If you can tolerate it, they are a little bit rigid. The next thing is compression, obviously, right? Not allowing, right, that inflammation of the tendon, not allowing that edema to come out, right? The thing is, tendinosis is a little bit of a different beast. Usually tendinosis was tendinitis at some point, and then that inflammation ended up scarring the tendon, shriveling it down. So tendinosis is more along the lines of, something like PRP injection, stem cell, things like that, physical therapy, or even surgery. Yes, tendinosis does respond very well to rest and therapy. It's just that usually tendinitis is the acute stage, right, where you can actually get it to calm down without too much intervention. Tendinosis is when you need to start intervening more and more and more. The next thing is picking out which shoe to wear. Now remember, LeBron James is getting custom lasted shoes, right? So all the shoes he has are perfectly matched to his exact foot shape. If it's me, I would not even look in the same direction as the witness line, because number one, the rear foot is so unstable, so you're gonna get a lot of that micro motion, a lot of that toggling, and that's what is gonna aggravate those peroneals so much, right? Because when they're zigging, this shoe is trying to zag. The next, ironically, would be the next gen line, or the next gen, or next gen amped. These aren't terrible, really. They do stay pretty stable. The rear foot is decently wide. The one thing about these is especially in the amped, they are a little bit stiff in the rear foot. So if you do have any hot spots on that peroneal tendon, these might aggravate it a little bit. Not the worst choice if they are broken in, right? But I still do think his signature shoe is probably the best shoe for this, just because number one, it's got the most broad and kind of stable lateral flange of all these shoes in the fleet. It has enough of a stable rear foot. I mean, it's not like the next gens, right? It's not as wide, but it is stable enough. It does have a decent tie down. It actually does have a really nice dense padding around the ankle collar, so once it is broken in, you're gonna get a little bit more compression, a little bit more comfort around those peroneals, right? It's not gonna be as kind of hard and unforgiving as the next gen amped or the next gen would be. It's gonna be a little bit more buttery around the foot, and you can fit an orthotic, you can fit a brace, you can easily fit 2 socks in this model. So although it is the easy answer to go with the flagship most expensive shoe, I do think it is the best for this, just because it is the most stable shoe in his fleet. Now, is he gonna need to take off games? Is he gonna need to maybe take a rest for a while? Honestly, it depends on how inflamed this tendon is, right? To me, during the All-Star break, that probably would have been a really good time to just rest, ice, compress, and elevate this thing. Obviously, he was playing the All-Star game. That's obviously not as much of a load on his foot, but remember, every time you're leaping into the air, this is gonna happen, right? I do think, though, if he is in the proper gear, right, that being an orthotic, shoes that are, a little bit easier to get up off the ground in, like the LeBron 21s, that is gonna do the most for him. No, a barefoot shoe or an anatomic shaped shoe is not gonna do anything, especially because he's getting custom lasted shoes anyway. But remember, in basketball, you actually do want a shoe that has a little bit of a curvature to it, right? You want something that's a little bit more streamlined in the forefoot, because that's what's easiest to get up off the ground, right? That's what's easiest to propulse. When you propulse off the ground, your metatarsal heads, or the ball of your foot, those bones stack, right? And that's what allows you to push off efficiently. If you've got something that you're splaying your toes in, you're actually gonna have to activate those muscles in the back of your foot more, and that will actually inflame them more, right? So, overuse injuries like peroneal tendinitis, tendinosis, tendinopathy, whatever, they're overuse injuries for a reason, because you're overusing them. The human body is not designed to play at that high of a level for that long, right? Things just start breaking down. It's the same as Rafa Nadal, same as Roger Federer in the tennis space, right? Those two have the best technique, the best footwork, the best everything you could possibly have, and yet their bodies still start breaking down in certain areas, because that's just where the gears are just grinding the most. Same with LeBron. So I would say if the Lakers get into a position, right, where they can do some load management with him, that's probably gonna be the best thing for him. Honestly, in my practice, the best thing for me has been obviously rest, put up someone in a boot, right? When he's not on court, he should be in an offloading boot, right? Just take as much stress off of that area as humanly possible. Obviously, taping is really beneficial as well, because for 25 to 45 minutes, depending on how good your athletic trainer is, that tape will hold pretty steady, right? And then, at halftime, go in, redo it, right? Or when he's on the bench, you can just redo it a little bit quicker than that, right? So I think a combination of all that probably should get him through the season. In the off season, I am sure there's going to be a lot of rest, a consideration for potential surgery, right? Depending on what is going on in the tendon, right? Sometimes surgery isn't appropriate, sometimes it is. Sometimes the surgery can actually be worse than the cure that it's aiming to provide. So, this is one of those things where you're trying to push and pull different levers to get him to the end of the season and to allow him to play at his optimum. Remember, they're not going to tell you exactly how bad it is and exactly what's going on because they don't want to provide aid and comfort to another team, right? If you're in the playoffs and you know that he can only go for a certain amount of time before he loses a lot of his lift, before he loses a lot of his explosiveness, well, that's going to change the game plan for something. So they're going to want to make sure that they're a little bit more vague, right? Just so the Lakers can use him as effectively as possible. So if you have any questions, leave in the comments down below, or if there's been any updates to this after this video has been brought out, I'm sure the community would love to know that in the comments down below as well. And if you do want a free guide to orthotics and some things, how to wear them, how long they should last, things like that, I also have that as a link in the description below. And if you do want to see what's going on also with someone like Steph Curry or Trae Young and their ankle issues and what they're doing and specific bracing techniques they are using to combat that, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.